The first rays of Manhattan's sunlight filtered through the towering windows of the Grand Continental Hotel's marble lobby, casting golden patterns across the polished floor. Grace Washington moved through these patches of light with practiced invisibility, her soft-soled shoes silent against the stone. At 28, Grace possessed a natural elegance that her navy housekeeping uniform couldn't quite conceal, the way she held her shoulders, the precision of her movements, the intelligence that flickered behind her warm brown eyes. But after 2 years of this carefully constructed life, she had perfected the art of being overlooked. "Morning, Grace," Tommy Martinez called from behind the front desk. At 19, he still smiled genuinely at everyone, even at this early hour. "You're here early again." Mrs. Bell requested fresh linens before her yoga session, Grace replied, her voice carrying the careful neutrality she'd mastered. What she didn't mention was the sleepless night she'd spent reading her grandmother's worn leather journal. "True character, my dear Grace, reveals itself not in what we own, but in how we treat those who can do nothing for us." Grandmother Evelyn's words flowed across Grace's memory like a familiar prayer. The woman who had raised her after her parents' death. The woman who had built an empire from nothing and left Grace everything, with one impossible condition. Preston Ashworth three-stepped from his Bentley onto the tarmac, surveying his private Gulfstream with the satisfaction of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. At 54, everything about Preston screamed old money: his custom Armani suit, his perfectly styled silver hair, the Patek Philippe watch that caught the morning sun. Finally, civilization, he muttered to his wife Catherine, who emerged behind him in cream Chanel. "The charity gala tonight should position us perfectly for your Senate announcement," Catherine replied, her sharp beauty honed by decades of social climbing. Their son Bryce, 25 and already showing his father's entitled swagger, barely looked up from his phone. "Did you see the guest list? Every major donor in Manhattan will be there." Charlotte, their 16-year-old daughter, trailed behind, clutching a worn copy of Between the World and Me. Unlike her family, she moved with less confidence, her designer clothes seeming to weigh her down rather than elevate her. "Charlotte, put that book away," Catherine commanded as they boarded the jet. "We need to discuss your speech for tonight." "Mom, I was thinking about addressing some of the systemic issues." "You'll stick to the approved talking points," Preston interrupted with absolute authority. "Your job is to represent the family with dignity, not solve the world's problems with teenage idealism." Charlotte fell silent, but her fingers tightened around her book. She'd been questioning everything lately: their wealth, their purpose, their treatment of others. The Ashworths arrived at the Grand Continental with the confident energy of people accustomed to deference. Preston emerged from the main elevator like he owned the building, his presence commanding immediate attention from hotel staff. Grace was near the service elevator, hoping to avoid interaction, when Preston's voice cut through the lobby noise. "Excuse me. You with the cart?" Grace's heart sank. She turned slowly, maintaining her professional composure. "Yes, sir." Preston approached with the stride of a man who had never been denied anything. "I need you to personally handle our suite. Suite 1847. My family has very specific requirements." "Of course, sir. I can arrange for our head of housekeeping to—" "No," Preston interrupted sharply. "I said personally. Can you understand English? Do you know what personally means?" The lobby seemed to quiet around them. Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks but maintained her dignity. "I understand perfectly, sir. I'd be happy to take care of your suite." Catherine joined the conversation, her gaze traveling dismissively from Grace's hair to her shoes. "Preston, are you sure? She looks adequate, I suppose." "What my wife means," Preston continued, though Catherine had been perfectly clear, "is that we expect exceptional service. The Ashworth family doesn't accept mediocrity from anyone, especially—" He gestured vaguely at Grace's uniform. Grace's grandmother's voice echoed in her memory: "Dignity is something no one can take from you unless you give it away." She straightened her shoulders imperceptibly. "I assure you, sir, your suite will receive the highest standard of care." Something in Grace's composed response irritated Preston. There was too much intelligence in her eyes, too much poise in her bearing. It didn't fit his narrative about who she was supposed to be. Listen carefully, Grace, Preston said, his voice taking on a deliberately cruel edge. When I speak to you, I expect appropriate deference. Yes, sir, and no, sir are about the extent of what I need to hear. I don't need your assurances or opinions about hotel standards. I need compliance. The elderly gentleman reading by the fireplace had lowered his newspaper, watching with obvious disapproval. Business women by the concierge desk whispered to each other, their expressions troubled. Do you understand me? Preston demanded. Grace met his eyes directly for the first time. For just a moment, Preston saw something flicker there, something that didn't quite fit his assumptions about who she was supposed to be. I understand perfectly, Grace said quietly. Good. Preston's smile was cold and satisfied. Suite 1847. 5 o'clock. Don't disappoint us. Charlotte sat in her bedroom at the hotel, staring at her reflection. The scene in the lobby played on repeat in her mind, each viewing making her feel sicker. The casual cruelty of her father's words. Her mother's calculated smile. Her brother's entertainment at another person's humiliation. Charlotte, what's wrong with you? Catherine's sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. You've been sulking since we arrived. I'm not sulking, Charlotte said quietly. I'm thinking about that woman downstairs. About how we treated her. The suite fell silent except for the air conditioning's soft hum. How we treated her? Preston's voice was dangerously quiet. We treated her exactly as she is. Hired help who needed to understand her position. But Dad, the way you spoke to her was appropriate for the situation, Catherine interrupted. Charlotte, you don't understand how the world works. I understand enough to know that being rich doesn't give us the right to be cruel. Bryce laughed. Oh, here we go. Charlotte's having another social justice moment. It's not a moment. Charlotte stood up, her book falling to the floor. It's basic human decency. That woman was being polite, doing her job, and you treated her like garbage because you could. Preston's face flushed red. Young lady, I will not be lectured by a child who has never worked for anything in her life. Maybe that's the problem, Charlotte whispered. Maybe we should know what it's like to be treated the way we treat others. The silence that followed crackled with tension. You will apologize right now for disrespecting this family, Preston said, his voice ice cold. Charlotte looked at her father's righteous anger, her mother's disgusted disappointment, her brother's smirk. I'm sorry, she said finally. But as she walked to her room, she paused. Dad, what if we're wrong? What if treating people badly doesn't make us better? What if it just makes us terrible people with money? Grace stood outside Suite 1847, centering herself with deep breaths the way her grandmother had taught her during childhood anxiety attacks. When the world feels too heavy, my dear Grace, remember that storms pass, but your character is permanent. She knocked twice and entered the opulent suite. The Ashworths continued their gala preparations around her as if she were furniture. The youth vote will be crucial, Preston was saying into his phone. Americans still believe in earning what you get. Grace paused in her dusting. The irony was staggering, a man who had inherited his wealth lecturing about earning success. As she worked, overhearing their casual conversations, Grace gained unprecedented insight into their world. Preston genuinely believed he was self-made. Catherine truly thought their charity work made them humanitarian heroes. Bryce was already showing the aimless entitlement that destroyed many wealthy heirs. But Charlotte was different. She emerged wearing a simple black dress, her expression uncomfortable and conflicted. Charlotte, you look lovely, Catherine said approvingly. Remember, tonight you represent our family's future. When Preston began practicing his speech, Grace couldn't help but read over his notes. My fellow Americans, we gather tonight to reaffirm that success comes to those who work hardest and dream biggest. The disconnect was almost comedic. Dad, Charlotte said hesitantly, what if someone asks about income inequality? About why charity is necessary when we could fund social programs through taxes? The suite fell silent. Charlotte, Preston's voice was carefully controlled. What have we discussed about appropriate topics? I know, but... No buts, Catherine snapped. Tonight is not the time for your social justice phase. Maybe we should be prepared for honest questions about wealth and responsibility, Charlotte continued, her voice growing stronger despite her fear. Wealth and responsibility. Preston stood, his notes scattering. Our family has donated millions. We employ hundreds. We pay enormous taxes. What more responsibility do you think we have? Charlotte glanced at Grace, then back at her father. Maybe the responsibility to treat people like they're actually human. The words hung in the air like smoke. Grace's hand stilled on the window she was cleaning. I see, Preston said slowly. This is about the maid. Her name is Grace, Charlotte said quietly. And yes, it's about how we treat people who work for us. Grace found herself frozen between continuing her work and fleeing before the family argument escalated. But she was also fascinated by Charlotte's courage. Young lady, Catherine's voice was ice, you are dangerously close to embarrassing this family. What if what we've built is wrong? Charlotte's whisper sounded like a shout in the silent suite. Preston walked slowly toward his daughter, his face a mask of controlled fury. Wrong? You think our family's legacy is wrong? I think treating people badly is wrong. Grace held her breath as this 16-year-old girl did what Grace hadn't managed in 2 years. She spoke truth to power, even when that power was her own family. The Grand Continental's ballroom had been transformed into a showcase of Manhattan's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over ivory silk, each centerpiece a masterpiece worth more than most monthly salaries. Grace moved through this glittering world wearing a server's black uniform, invisible to guests who took champagne without acknowledgement. She had volunteered for the evening shift, compelled to witness this display from the inside. Grace! A familiar voice stopped her cold. Eleanor Bell approached, elegant in midnight blue. At 73, Mrs. Bell carried herself with the dignity of someone who had seen everything. Mrs. Bell, I didn't expect to see you here. I'm on the Literacy Foundation board, Mrs. Bell replied, then lowered her voice. But Grace, I've known your grandmother for years. Evelyn Washington was brilliant, tough as nails but with a heart the size of Manhattan. Grace's champagne tray trembled. After 2 years of carrying this secret alone, this near stranger had seen through her facade with startling clarity. She wanted you to understand, Mrs. Bell continued gently, what it means to be overlooked, judged by appearance rather than character. I've learned more than I ever wanted to, Grace whispered. Your grandmother would be proud. But sometimes the most important lesson is knowing when the teaching is complete. Preston took the podium as the evening's keynote speaker, his silver hair catching the stage lights. The teleprompter displayed his carefully crafted words about opportunity and the American dream, a speech designed to launch his political career. Ladies and gentlemen, Preston began confidently, we gather tonight as Americans who understand that success comes to those who work hardest and dream biggest. Grace stood with the service staff, planning to leave after his speech but unable to move. Something kept her rooted in place. My family has been part of this great city for 4 generations, Preston continued, warming to his theme. We've built businesses, created jobs, contributed to society through dedication and unwavering commitment to excellence. Grace thought about her grandmother's actual journey, 3 jobs, night school, decades of saving every penny. But I want to talk about something beyond success, Preston's voice grew passionate. I want to talk about responsibility, the obligation that comes with achievement. At the Ashworth table, Charlotte shifted uncomfortably. After her conversation with Grace, her father's words felt hollow. There are those who believe success should be apologized for, Preston continued, that achievement should be diminished in the name of equality. But I believe those of us blessed with success have a responsibility not to apologize, but to use our achievements as examples of what's possible in America. The audience applauded, loving being told their wealth was virtuous. Which brings me to an important point, Preston's tone grew harder. Some people are simply better equipped for success. Some understand discipline and personal responsibility. Others make excuses. Charlotte felt her stomach drop, recognizing where this was heading. I was reminded of this truth just this afternoon, Preston continued, and Grace felt the blood drain from her face. My family encountered a perfect example of this mindset right here in this hotel. The ballroom grew completely quiet. We interacted with a member of the hotel staff who seemed to believe that working in an establishment like this somehow elevated her status, who carried herself with an attitude suggesting she thought she was our equal rather than our employee. Grace's hands trembled as she realized he was actually doing this, turning her humiliation into a political talking point. This young woman needed to be reminded that wearing a uniform in a luxury hotel doesn't make you luxury, that serving wealthy people doesn't make you wealthy, that proximity to success doesn't equal success itself. The audience leaned forward, absorbing this real-world illustration. And when we provided that reality check, she accepted it. Because deep down, she knew we were right. Charlotte couldn't take it anymore. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly in the silent ballroom. "Charlotte, sit down," Catherine hissed. "Dad, stop," Charlotte said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Please just stop." Preston's confidence faltered. "Charlotte, this isn't the time." "Yes, it is the time," Charlotte interrupted, finding her strength. "You're telling 500 people that you humiliated a hotel worker and calling it responsibility." The ballroom was completely silent now, cameras turning toward the drama. "You're talking about success and hard work, but you inherited everything. You're talking about responsibility, but you've never worked a service job. You're talking about knowing your place, but you've only ever known the top." Preston's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Charlotte, that's enough. No. I won't sit down while you use another person's pain as a prop for your political ambitions." Grace watched from the shadows as Charlotte defended her with courage Grace hadn't found in 2 years. But then Margaret Morrison approached the abandoned microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos, "since we're discussing responsibility and knowing one's place, perhaps Mr. Ashworth would explain how humiliating hotel workers fits with his claimed values." Preston stood frozen between his rebellious daughter and public disgrace. His political launch had become its execution. Grace realized her moment of truth had arrived. She could slip away quietly or step forward and reveal a truth that would change everything. Her grandmother's voice echoed, "True power is not the ability to destroy your enemies. It's the ability to choose mercy when destruction would be easier." Grace began walking toward the front of the ballroom. Mrs. Bell noticed first, her face breaking into a knowing smile as she created a path through the crowd. "Excuse me," Grace said, her voice cutting through every other sound. Conversation stopped. Phones lowered. Every eye turned toward the woman in the service uniform. Preston went white. Catherine's mouth opened in shock. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Grace continued, stepping between the Ashworth table and the podium. "But Mr. Ashworth has been telling a story about me, and I think you should hear the rest." The silence was absolute. "My name is Grace Washington," she said clearly. "Mr. Ashworth is correct, I am a hotel employee. I have spent 2 years cleaning rooms and being invisible to people who believe wealth determines worth." "This is inappropriate," Preston sputtered. "Security should." "Let her speak," Mrs. Morrison commanded firmly. Grace looked directly at Preston. "Mr. Ashworth told you I needed to learn my place, that I had ideas above my station. He was right about one thing, proximity to success doesn't equal success. But he was wrong about who needed to learn their place." She pulled out a folded document from her pocket. "This is the deed to the Grand Continental Hotel. According to this document, I don't just work here. I own here." The ballroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, camera flashes exploding like lightning. "My grandmother, Evelyn Washington, built a $50 billion empire from nothing. She started as a hotel maid, just like I've been for 2 years. When she died, she left me everything with one condition." The crowd quieted desperately to hear every word. "She wanted me to spend 2 years experiencing life from the perspective of people society overlooks and treats as disposable. She wanted me to understand what it really means to have power over others." Grace's eyes found Charlotte's across the room, seeing tears streaming down her face. "So yes, Mr. Ashworth, I know my place. My place is using the wealth my grandmother earned to lift up people like the woman you tried to tear down. My place is remembering that dignity isn't determined by bank balance, And respect isn't something that should be purchased. She turned to address the entire room. The money you're sitting on, the influence you wield, none of that makes you better than the people who serve you. It just makes you luckier. Looking back at Preston one final time, the difference between us isn't that I had ideas above my station. It's that I never forgot every person deserves basic human dignity. Grace folded the deed and put it away. Mr. Ashworth, you wanted to teach me about responsibility. Let me teach you about mine. As owner of this hotel, my first responsibility is ensuring no guest ever treats my staff the way you treated me. She paused, letting the words sink in. You have 24 hours to check out. The next morning, Grace sat in her modest studio apartment with her grandmother's journal, coffee growing cold as sunlight streamed through her window. The media explosion had been immediate. The billion-dollar Maid was trending across every platform. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Charlotte Ashworth, still in her gala dress but with flat shoes, looking exhausted and very young. Grace opened the door. Charlotte, how did you find me? Tommy helped me. I needed to apologize. Grace let her in, studying the young woman's tear-reddened but determined eyes. You didn't need to come here, Grace said gently. You defended me when no one else would. I should have defended you yesterday afternoon, Charlotte replied. Instead, I sat there like a coward. You're 16, Charlotte. Standing up to family takes courage most adults never develop. But you had courage. Even when you could have destroyed us completely, you chose truth instead of revenge. Grace was quiet, thinking about her choice the previous evening. My father's political career is over, Charlotte said matter-of-factly. The videos have been viewed millions of times. How do you feel about that? Charlotte stared out the window at the neighborhood beyond, a world her family had never bothered to see. Relieved, she said finally. Is that terrible? That makes you wise. Grace, why didn't you reveal who you were when my father was being horrible? Why not just show you own the hotel? Grace considered carefully. Because I needed to understand what powerlessness felt like. You can't truly appreciate having power until you've experienced not having it. If I'd revealed my wealth immediately, I would have learned nothing. What did you learn? That dignity comes from how you treat people who can't do anything for you. That real strength is choosing mercy when victory would be easier. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. I want to be like you. I want to use whatever advantages I have to help people. Then you will, Grace said simply, because wanting to be better is the first step toward becoming better. Later that morning, Grace walked through the hotel lobby, still wearing her housekeeping uniform but seeing everything with new eyes. Tommy grinned from the front desk. I can't believe it, Grace. I always knew there was something special about you. I'm still the same person, Tommy. Just with a different story than expected. Before she could reach the elevator, she heard her name. Preston Ashworth approached, looking like a man who had aged decades overnight. His confident stride was gone, replaced by uncertain steps. Miss Washington, could I have a word? Grace studied his face, seeing none of the previous arrogance. I wanted to apologize, Preston said, the words clearly difficult. For yesterday, for what I said, how I treated you. There's no excuse. No, Grace agreed quietly. There isn't. Preston flinched but continued. I also wanted to thank you for choosing truth over destruction. You could have ruined us completely. Mr. Ashworth, what do you think I should do about your reservation? Preston's shoulders sagged. That's entirely up to you. What if I asked you to stay? Preston looked up, surprised. What if I asked you to stay not as a guest, but as someone willing to learn? What if I offered you the chance to understand what it means to serve others instead of being served? Preston's eyes widened. You want me to work here? I want you to choose. You can leave and return to your old life, having learned nothing. Or you can stay and understand what it means to be invisible, judged by your uniform, treated as less than human by people who think wealth equals worth. You're asking me to become a hotel worker. I'm asking you to become a human being. The question is whether you're willing to do that work. The elevator opened and Catherine and Bryce emerged, looking exhausted and shaken. "Miss Washington," Catherine said cautiously, "we wanted to apologize as well." Grace looked at the three family members, humbled, uncertain, but present, willing to face consequences instead of running. "I'm not going to kick you out," Grace said finally. "But I am going to offer you something more challenging than leaving." She explained her proposal, a month working service positions at the hotel, experiencing life from the perspective of people they treated as disposable. Charlotte stepped forward immediately. "I accept." Preston looked at his daughter, then at Grace, then back at his daughter. Slowly, he nodded. "I accept as well." Catherine hesitated longer but eventually nodded. "If my family is doing this, I will too." Bryce was last to agree. "Okay, I'll try." Grace smiled, the first genuine smile since her grandmother's death. "Welcome to your new jobs. You start Monday at 6 a.m. Tommy will show you where to get uniforms." Grace sat behind her mahogany desk, reviewing reports from the hotel's expanded scholarship program and worker dignity initiative that had become a model nationwide. Charlotte knocked and entered, wearing a business suit instead of a uniform. After completing her housekeeping month, she'd stayed as an intern in community outreach and convinced her school to start a mandatory service program. "The scholarship ceremony is ready," Charlotte said. "Are you ready?" Grace straightened her designer jacket, worn with the same dignity she'd maintained in her uniform. "How are your parents?" Charlotte's smile was bright and genuine. "Dad loves working maintenance, says it's the first time he's felt like he earned his paycheck. Mom's still struggling with housekeeping but learning. And Bryce discovered he's actually good at customer service." Grace joined Charlotte's laughter. "People can surprise themselves when they are willing to try." Walking toward the ballroom, Grace thought about her grandmother's wisdom. The experiment was complete, the inheritance fully claimed. But more importantly, lessons had been learned, not just by Grace, but by everyone whose life had been touched by the truth that dignity, respect, and worth could never be purchased, only earned through how we choose to treat one another. The woman in the housekeeping uniform had taught some of New York's wealthiest people that true power came not from having everything, but from lifting others up. In doing so, she had finally become worthy of her inheritance, not because of its size, but because of the wisdom she possessed to use it well. Sometimes the greatest transformations happen when we choose growth over comfort. The most powerful inheritance isn't money, it's the wisdom to know what really matters.